Zootopia 2 was good. I don't think this movie was ever going to be as good as the first one in my opinion, but I would have no reason to disagree with you if you prefer this over the previous one. My biggest concern going into this was that it would feel unnecessary like the majority of Disney sequels tend to be nowadays, and I unfortunately found that to be the case within the first third of the film. It is by no means egregious or terrible, but I didn't find myself invested in what was going on. A lot of that is due to the obvious sequel setups that had me worried this would go in a predictable direction. But thankfully the movie gets much better as it goes along. The pacing picks up drastically and the comedy becomes a particular highlight. Similar to most Disney animated movies, not every joke landed, but I did find myself chuckling at a lot of the visual gags present in this film. The animation is nothing to necessarily behold when it comes to Disney at this point, but it does help that the settings are more creative in how they are utilized, making it fun to experience these different landscapes that we get to explore. In terms of the story, I think this overall does a good job at continuing the themes of the first film in a satisfying fashion. While I admit I wasn't into the cliched nature of it at first, the film thankfully leads to a narrative that makes sense and feels satisfying in the long run. Without getting into spoilers, it vaguely touches on themes such as,
"You used me for land development." That wasn't nice.
Jokes aside, this actually makes sense for the narrative and clearly expands on the first film without feeling forced. Minor spoilers. I really enjoyed that this film addressed the presence of reptiles, which is an aspect I don't even remember being mentioned in the first film. It's a great way to naturally continue the story, and I especially loved Ke Huy Quan's performance as Gary the Snake. He had an excellent sense of warmth and friendliness to the character, which brilliantly contrasts what people often see snakes as. They instead made him really sympathetic, and I loved the character design on him a lot. What I didn't love, however, was the twist villain thrown in at the end. Like, do we really need a twist villain in this movie with already clearly established threats? It just felt too obvious and unnecessary at that point. And the character barely even played much of a role in terms of personality and character traits, so it was obvious he was going to be bad from the start. Still, I thought that Zootopia 2 was a very good time and worth checking out in the theater. Like I said previously, I can see a lot of people liking this over the first one, and I'm glad people are enjoying it because I also did. I'm giving it a very high 6 out of 10. Before going to see Five Nuts and Fred Nards 2, I purchased some cheap stickers that me and my girlfriend could put on our face. We really wanted to show how massive of FNAF fans we truly were going into this theater, and it was safe to say that there were a lot of fans in this theater.
On your left.
There was even one kid taking a picture on his phone with flash every time the animatronics showed up on screen. God bless that child. Okay, I'll stop the sarcasm for a second. I don't hate the FNAF game series at all, but I certainly wouldn't call myself a fan of them either. I find the scary atmosphere of the first game to be a lot of fun, but the overcomplicated lore really plagues the series with unnecessary sequel installments. I'm glad it has its fans though, even though I don't happen to necessarily be one of them. With that being said, I thought the first movie was a massive piece of shit. The screenplay was atrocious, with a boring pace, filled with a ridiculous amount of repetitive scenes, especially those goddamn dream sequences, and some really terrible dialogue that couldn't be salvaged by any performance. I get that it's a movie that is only made for the fans in mind, but it alienates any other audience. The plot is simultaneously obvious, repetitive, and confusing at the same time, if that makes any sense. I also don't think the performances are quite the best either. In short, I gave the movie a 2 out of 10. But I'm genuinely happy that fans like it. I don't want to take that experience away from anyone else. And, yeah, that's what makes film criticism interesting at the end of the day. But with that said, I personally think it's a complete mess as a film. When it comes to this newest Five Nights at Freddy's film, there is a lot about this that is undeniably worse than the first. However, I would definitely prefer to watch this one over that. And that is only because this one isn't as boring as the first. Oh, don't get me wrong, this movie is still boring as sin. But at the very least, there are more entertaining moments, whether intentional or not. What is undeniably the worst aspect of this movie is the script. Unlike the first, this film is exclusively written by the game's creator, Scott Cawthon, and unfortunately the dialogue, structure, and character dynamics are significantly worse than the previous movie, if you can believe that. Right off the bat, the movie starts with children speaking to each other in a manner that is completely unrealistic. Now, I don't mind if my Five Nights and Freddy's movie is unrealistic by any means, but do you really expect me to believe that children in 1982 talk like modern adults? It's just frustrating to see how careless and rushed the dialogue immediately feels, even though this is supposed to be created for the fans. All I can really ask is, don't the fans deserve better than this? A terrifying incident involving a child murder sets off the film's events, and we're left to experience the sloppy seconds of Blumhouse's financially successful Krabby Patty secret formula. At this point, though, we know what that formula is. Cheap to modest budgets, limited locations, and bare minimum ideas that leads to terrible pacing issues. This film is no exception to the Blumhouse formula. And I want to acknowledge that this is absolutely not surprising to me, but I don't think I have covered a movie from the studio before. And I don't think every movie from them is necessarily god-awful, but I am so sick of these tropes that they often stick to. Because even a bad movie with a modest to low budget will still make its money back despite the constant complaints everyone may have with them. We can really only vote with our wallets in this scenario. Back to the movie once again, all of the main characters are wooden when it comes to their performances and how they are written. Besides some okay performances, like in 2 scenes, all of the acting is on a level that is just not even trying.
Everybody betrayed me. I fed up with this world.
The actress playing Abby is particularly not good. Now look, I don't like picking apart child performances like most people, but every performance in the movie is that wooden, and she just happens to be the worst example of it. I really think it comes down to poor direction when everyone is acting like this. It's clear that the actors have nothing to work with, so they come off as confused and doing whatever they can to salvage whatever material they are a part of. It's definitely a movie where you can tell everyone is looking at the camera going, "Yeah, I know this is a piece of shit." There's also a side character whose sole purpose is to provide a convenient car ride for one of the main characters whose vehicle happened to break down in front of him. He literally appears in the beginning for seemingly no reason, and then the movie realized he needed a purpose, although this workaround is entirely useless to the flow of the story. There were a couple moments I did enjoy very, very briefly, some of it definitely ironic, but others where it wasn't necessarily the case. The Newton Brothers score is actually pretty good. These guys are super productive in the industry, and this proves why they're a powerful force. They can make mediocre material feel a lot bigger, which is something I can very much appreciate. There was also a brief moment where Shadow Bonnie appears like he did in the games. That was neat. And the marionette piranha kill was kind of fun. Other moments I enjoyed ironically was this.
I've been expecting you. Come, we have much to discuss.
But see, this movie isn't made for me. I enjoyed the first Five Nights game for what it is, but I wouldn't consider myself to be a fan of the franchise as I stated before. There were a lot of fans at the theater I went to, and they seemed to be eating this up. I'm definitely glad they enjoyed it, but I can't help but feel that the fans deserve better than sloppy seconds. And I'm giving Five Nuts and Frednards 2 a 3 out of 10. Alright, and now we move on to a great start to movies this year, 28 Years Later, The Bone Temple. Before going into this, I should give my thoughts on the previous 28 Years Later, and I guess the entire franchise to a certain extent. I had a really great time with 28 Years Later. I felt like Danny Boyle's direction brought this manic energy to the picture that I haven't seen replicated in other zombie flicks. I also really loved the progression of the story in that, with the primary focus being on family dynamics and the positives and negatives that come from it, especially in a Last of Us type world that is relentless and unpredictable. Aided by an incredible score by Young Fathers, bringing their own style to the music and not directly copying what John Murphy did with 28 Days Later, which in of itself is also an incredible score. When it comes to the franchise as a whole, I think the first 28 Days Later is easily the best. I don't really have a lot to say on that one. However, I'm not really a fan of 28 Weeks Later, which may seem like an unpopular opinion. And that's fine if you don't feel that way, but I can't help but feel that 28 Weeks Later felt very Hollywoodized in a sense, without any of the substance or filmmaking prowess that made the original such a classic. To me, it just felt like an imitation of that. But what's interesting is that this new film, The Bone Temple, has a fairly straightforward direction to it, but I really think that this movie is aided by a significantly better script than 28 Weeks Later. I bring that movie up because this movie and 28 Weeks Later were not actually directed by Danny Boyle, so I had a bit of concern going into this, but I personally think Nia DaCosta really did an outstanding job at bringing her own vision into the world. Alex Garland writing the script is clearly the strength of this franchise as well, and he pushes the ideas introduced in 28 Years Later and fleshes them out here in ways that I found very fascinating. I'm going to get into brief spoilers with 28 Years Later, the first movie I mean, since this movie literally takes place directly after that. But I'll do my best not to get into spoilers for this one. To me, the best thing this movie does is explore the relationship between Dr. Kelson and the infected alpha, Samson. In the last movie, Samson is built up to be this horrifying monster that resulted from years of the infection spreading. The characters even refer to it as the rage virus on steroids. In this movie, however, they allude to Samson having some sort of sympathy for Dr. Kelson. And that's all I'll say on that matter because I think they explore that concept in many interesting ways. And directly continuing the controversial ending of the last movie, with the Jimmies taking Spike into their cult, their presence in this movie is legitimately terrifying, and Sir Jimmy, played by Jack O'Connell, I think gives the best performance in this alongside Ray Fiennes, who continues to be excellent as Dr. Kelson. But it's terrifying what the gang not only does to Spike, but how they treat everyone surviving the outbreak all these years later, like almost 3 decades later. One involving a horrific torture scene that would make me rather get taken by the infected than come across any of these Jimmy Savile sickos. And continuing the progression of the last movie, Dr. Kelson now seems oddly like a sympathetic character than how he was initially introduced. In the first film, we hear Spike's dad describe the horrors of Kelson burning hundreds of corpses in a field, but we soon learn that it's a temple of remembrance to the dead. And the way we see Kelson become a sympathetic individual in the Bone Temple is absolutely fascinating. He may seem crazy on the outside, but he still has sympathy for the dead and wants to somehow reverse whatever the rage virus is. Although even he doesn't quite know how to do it at the end of the day, besides his interactions with Samson. But as alluded to before, one interesting point to make is that the movie isn't as focused on Spike. In fact, Spike is being completely manipulated in this movie, and we feel that dread right alongside of him. And yeah, we're just as terrified alongside him too, because we're just as confused about what this cult could possibly do, how Spike can still have some individuality in him alongside of them, and desperately trying to hold on to his identity that is slowly being taken away by these Jimmies that even want to call him Jimmy now. Like, he ain't Spike anymore. It's great. And the contrast between the Jimmies being so sadistic, brutal, but also childlike is a really great choice. As we learned in the first movie, Jimmy himself was literally watching Teletubbies on the TV before the infection even happened. And that influenced him to lead this cult later on. But you can also see the influence from, like I said before, figures like Jimmy Savile, which is a horrifying thought to think about, and I'm not going to get into what he did, but I think that's a great choice to take this story on. The only parts of the movie I took issue with were only a couple of cheesy moments that were sprinkled throughout. This doesn't always bother me for a horror movie experience, but I could see some people having an issue with this. Not going to dwell on that too much though, since it does get spoilery, and I really don't want to ruin the experience for anyone. And I hear that the third movie has been greenlit with Danny Boyle to return as director. With how much I enjoyed the first 28 Years Later and now The Bone Temple, I gotta say this is a trilogy I'm legitimately looking forward to seeing as a whole. So please go check this out if you're at all interested. Even if you didn't like the previous movie, I have a strong feeling that you will come out of this having a very good time. So yeah, I'm giving this one an 8 out of 10. Thank you.